The October evening shrouded Olympia in a chilly dampness. Nellie Montgomery was at the university longer than usual, checking her students' term papers. A red maple leaf stuck to the windshield of her car, resembling a bloody palm print. She turned on the windshield wipers, wiping away the unpleasant sight. The massive gates of the Montgomery mansion slid silently open, allowing her mistress's silver sedan in. As she parked in the garage, Nellie noticed that the light in her husband's office was still on. Arthur often stayed late into the night, immersed in endless business negotiations. The spacious hallway greeted her with an unaccustomed silence. Martha, the housekeeper, had already left, leaving a note about the dinner she'd prepared. Nellie took off her shoes, enjoying the touch of her bare feet on the warm floor. The heating system was one of the many improvements she and Arthur had implemented when remodeling the old mansion. As she climbed the stairs, she heard her husband's muffled voice. Arthur spoke softly, but in the empty house, the sounds were especially clear. Nellie froze on the last step, listening. "Tomorrow, sweetheart. I promise I'll buy you that cottage tomorrow." Arthur's voice sounded unaccustomedly soft, with those special intonations he usually saved for her alone. "You deserve the best. We've thought of everything. No one will suspect a thing." Nellie's fingers dug into the railing. The cool wood beneath her hand seemed the only anchor in a reality that suddenly began to crumble like a house of cards. "Amelia, my sunshine, be patient for a little while. Soon we can be together openly." Those words sounded like a sentence, finally shattering the illusion of a happy marriage. Nellie silently went downstairs, mechanically threw on her coat, and left the house. The cool air cleared her thoughts a little. She got into the car, started the engine, but did not move. Her mind was reeling with fragments of memories. Dinners together, plans for the future, morning coffee in bed, all of it now colored in new, bitter tones. The phone vibrated, a message from Arthur. "I'm late for work. Don't wait up for dinner." Nellie grinned. 23 years of marriage had taught her a lot, but it turned out, not everything. She dialed the number of her old friend, Professor Edward Thornton. "Ed, I'm sorry for calling so late. Remember you suggested I do a study on financial fraud in the construction business? I've accepted. When can we start?" Hanging up the phone, Nellie opened her laptop. The name Amelia needed verification. She began looking through social media, Arthur's business contacts, real estate databases. There had to be a clue somewhere. A photo from a charity event 6 months ago popped up on the screen. Arthur, in a tuxedo, stood next to a spectacular brunette in a red dress. The caption read, "Arthur Montgomery and Amelia Walter at the opening of a new apartment complex." Nellie enlarged the photograph. The young woman was looking at her husband with ill-concealed adoration. Betrayal now had a face, the handsome, confident face of a successful realtor from a rival company. A recent dinner conversation came to mind. Arthur had mentioned plans to expand his business, new promising projects. Now those words took on a completely different meaning. How many more lies lurked behind his business facade? Nellie closed her laptop and leaned against the cool glass. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. A thunderstorm was coming. She remembered how she had met Arthur. The young, ambitious entrepreneur had won her over with his energy and dreams of a great future. She believed in him, invested the money she inherited from her parents in his first projects. Together, they built a successful business and, it seemed, a happy life. The first drops of rain pounded on the garage roof. Nellie pulled out her cell phone and dialed another number. "Good evening, Mr. Harrison. I apologize for the late call. I need a consultation regarding asset management trusts. When can I come to your office?" Hanging up the phone, she smiled. Some people choose to suffer and cry, but Nellie Montgomery chose a different path. As Arthur stood at his window looking out at the intensifying rain, his wife began to weave a net that would be the perfect trap for him. In the house opposite, A window burned dimly. The silhouette of the neighbor, Mrs. Clark, could be seen behind the curtain. A respectable widow, she was a living chronicle of the neighborhood, noting every little detail of her neighbors' lives. Nellie thought that this habit of Mrs. Clark's might prove quite useful. The phone vibrated again. This time the message was from a colleague at the university. "Don't forget about the ethics committee meeting tomorrow." Nellie hummed. Ethics. What an interesting word. Perhaps it was time to give a lesson in ethics to those who had long forgotten it existed. She started the engine and slowly pulled into the street. The rain intensified, turning the world outside the window into a blurry watercolor. Somewhere in this city right now, Amelia Walter might be making plans for the future, unaware that her dreams of a life of luxury were about to turn into a nightmare. Nellie parked outside a small restaurant in the business district. This was where she and Arthur had celebrated their first big deal. Now, this place would be the starting point of a whole different story. She pulled a small notebook out of her purse and began to write. The revenge plan needed careful thought. The rearview mirror reflected a woman with a hard stare and slightly trembling hands. 23 years is no small amount of time, but sometimes all it takes is one phone call to redraw an entire life and start a new one. The morning light filtered through the heavy drapes of Arthur Montgomery's office. He was absent-mindedly reviewing papers, glancing at his watch every now and then. It was 3 hours before his meeting with Amelia. The secretary brought another stack of papers for him to sign, and he reached for a pen. "Mr. Montgomery, your wife called. Asked if you could have lunch with her today." The secretary's voice sounded habitually impassive. Arthur grimaced. Nellie had been taking more initiative in their relationship lately, and it was annoying. He'd gotten used to her silent presence around him, to her not asking too many questions. "Tell her I have an important meeting with investors. We'll have lunch another time." He waved it off, turning back to the paperwork. His phone vibrated, a message from Amelia. "Found the perfect house. Waiting for you at 2 o'clock on Lakeside Avenue." He smiled, imagining her impatient look. Amelia was the complete opposite of his wife. Bright, emotional, she made him feel younger. Next to her, gray, everyday life turned into a holiday. Arthur looked at the photograph of Nellie on the table, a strict suit, a restrained smile. This restraint had once seemed to him a sign of a good upbringing. The office phone rang. The name Robert Wayne, his old business partner, popped up on the display. "Arthur, we have a problem. The Ethics Commission has started a review of the latest deal." Robert's voice sounded worried. "Calm down. All the paperwork is in order. I personally followed up." Arthur leaned back in his chair, looking up at the ceiling. "It's not about the paperwork. Someone sent a request to check the sources of funding. And you know who's heading the commission? Your wife." Arthur straightened abruptly. Nellie had never taken an interest in his business, confining herself to the role of silent investor. What had changed? "I'll handle it." He hung up the phone and dialed his wife's number. The phone was off. There was a knock on the door. Henry Pierce, the company's head of security, entered. "Sir, you asked me to gather information on Miss Walter." Henry placed a thin folder on the desk. Arthur frowned. He had given no such order. Had Robert really? Opening the folder, he ran his eyes over the first lines and felt his back grow cold. Amelia Walter was not who she said she was. 3 priors for fraud, a name change, a fake college degree, photographs of her meetings with prominent downtown businessmen, always alone, always at expensive restaurants. "Is the source of the information reliable?" Arthur tried to speak calmly. "Absolutely. We checked everything twice." Henry paused. "There's something else. Miss Walter meets regularly with people from the IRS." Arthur let go of Henry and stared out the window. Beyond the glass spread the city he considered his fiefdom. The skyscrapers his company had built reflected the sunlight, giving the illusion of his empire's immutability. The phone vibrated again, this time from an unknown number. "Mr. Montgomery, I suggest you check your company's bank accounts. Some transactions look suspicious." He opened his laptop, logged into online banking. 5 minutes later, his hands were shaking. Someone was methodically withdrawing money from corporate accounts, disguising the transactions as legitimate transactions. Voices rang out in the reception area. The receptionist tried to stop someone, but the door swung open. Amelia stood on the threshold, flawless makeup, expensive suit, predatory smile. "Surprise, darling. Decided not to wait until 2 o'clock. She strode into the office, heels clacking on the parquet. Arthur looked at her with new eyes. How could he have missed that predatory grace, those calculating eyes? Love doesn't just blind. It makes even the most cautious person an idiot. "Have a seat, Amelia, or whatever your real name is." He pointed to the visitor's chair. Her smile grew wider. "Oh, you've made inquiries already. That's commendable, but a little late. What do you want?" "For starters, the truth. Tell me how you've been running your construction scams, and don't forget to mention the role of your precious wife." Arthur went cold. Nellie. She knew nothing of his machinations. He'd always carefully shielded her from the dirty side of the business. "Leave her alone." His voice sounded muffled. "I can't. You see, your wife hasn't turned out to be as simple-minded as you thought. She's been digging up your company for 2 weeks now, and you know what? She's very close to the truth." Arthur remembered Robert's call that morning, the Ethics Commission, Nellie at the head of the investigation. All the details were adding up to a frightening picture. "How much?" He pulled out his checkbook. Amelia laughed. "You think money solves everything? What about revenge?" "Revenge? For what?" "Ask your old partner, James Walter. Remember him? My father, the one you ruined 15 years ago." Arthur leaned back in his chair. James Walter. Of course he remembered. It had seemed like the right business decision at the time. Take out a competitor. Take over his assets. "He drank himself to death and died in poverty, and I swore that one day you'd pay for everything." Amelia stood up. "Enjoy the last days of your empire, Arthur. Soon it will all come crashing down." She walked away, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and a sense of impending disaster. Arthur dialed his banker's number, but the phone was silent. All his contacts were suddenly unavailable. New voices sounded in the reception area. He recognized the timbre of Robert and someone else from the board of directors. They were speaking loudly, demanding a meeting. Arthur looked at Nellie's picture. What had she had time to learn? And most importantly, what did she plan to do with this information? He pulled a folder from the safe with documents about secret offshore accounts. It's time to prepare an escape route, but first, he needed to make sure Nellie wasn't in any danger. No matter what, she was the only person he truly trusted. The clouds were gathering outside the window. A storm was coming like a harbinger of change. Arthur Montgomery, a man accustomed to being in control, felt for the first time that the ground was slipping from under his feet. Professor Edward Thornton's office was located in the old wing of the university. The massive bookcases, the leather armchair, and the smell of old books created an atmosphere of unshakable academic tradition. Nellie sat across from her longtime friend, looking at a folder of documents from 15 years ago. "The James Walter case. Why do you want that story?" Edward wiped his glasses, looking intently at his companion. "Just refreshing my memory. Back then, we all thought it was just a simple bankruptcy." Nellie flipped through the pages. "And now, I see a pattern." The yellowed pages unfolded the story of the collapse of a once successful construction company. James Walter, a respected businessman, had suddenly lost everything: contracts, partners, reputation. The newspapers wrote about failed investments and risky projects. You know what's interesting? Edward pulled an old photograph out of a desk drawer. This captures the last board of directors of Walter's company. Do you recognize anyone? Nellie took a closer look at the group shot. In the center is James Walter, a stately man with a penetrating gaze. To his right was young Arthur, ambitious and confident, and in the background, almost unnoticeable, is a very young girl. Amelia, Nellie ran her finger over the photograph. She's Walter's daughter. Exactly. After her father's bankruptcy, she disappeared. Changed her last name, started a new life. Now she's back, a successful realtor, socialite. There was a knock on the door. A secretary entered with a folder of papers. Professor Montgomery, the materials for the ethics committee meeting are ready. Nellie nodded, accepting the papers. After she left, Edward poured 2 cups of coffee. You do realize you're digging up your own husband, right? I'm digging for a criminal scheme, Ed. The fact that Arthur is involved is his choice, not mine. Outside the university window, a manicured park spread out. Nellie remembered how she'd met Arthur here. The young entrepreneur had come to the economics department to look for investors for his first project. She had just received her parents' inheritance at the time and was looking for ways to invest it profitably. Remember what happened to James Walter after the bankruptcy? Edward's voice brought her back to reality. The newspapers wrote about his drinking problem. Not only that, he tried to prove that his bankruptcy was the result of a planned attack. He collected documents, met with journalists, and then he suddenly dropped everything and disappeared. Nellie pulled out her laptop, opened a file of notes. A month after he disappeared, Arthur got a big city contract, the same one that was supposed to go to Walter's company. Have you ever wondered why your husband went so dramatically uphill precisely after Walter's collapse? Nellie remained silent. She remembered that period, the endless meetings, Arthur's late returns, his nervousness yet oddly confident. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Students walked past the office, their voices a reminder of the approaching committee meeting. You know what the best part of this story is? Edward pulled out another document. A week before he disappeared, Walter met with the tax assessor, the same one who is now conducting an audit of your husband's company. Nellie took the document. Dates, names, amounts. It all added up to a clear picture. I have to go now, Ed. Thanks for your help. She gathered up the papers. Be careful, Nellie. You're touching on dangerous secrets. In the hallway, she ran into a young woman who seemed vaguely familiar. After a moment, Nellie recognized her, Sarah Walter, Amelia's younger sister, now a sociology professor. Professor Montgomery? Sarah paused. Can I talk to you? They settled into the empty classroom. Sarah nervously rubbed the bracelet on her wrist. I know you're investigating a case from 15 years ago, and I know about Amelia. Why did you decide to talk to me? Because my sister isn't looking for justice. She wants revenge, and she's using you like she's used others. Nellie looked at her interlocutor carefully. Tell me everything you know. The story Sarah told was more complicated than imagined. James Walter hadn't just lost a business war. He had uncovered a scheme for large-scale fraud. Arthur was just part of the big game. Dad wanted to go public with everything, but they got to him before he did. Sarah's voice shook. Amelia vowed revenge on everyone involved. She's been plotting this for years. And you? What do you want? The truth, just the truth. Sarah pulled out a flash drive. These are copies of documents my father collected. He hid them before he disappeared. Nellie took the flash drive, a small piece of plastic that could bring down an empire of lies. Why didn't you go to the police with this? You know how it works. They have their own people everywhere, but you're different. You have influence, reputation, and most importantly, motive. After Sarah left, Nellie stood at the window for a long time. Downstairs, students were going about their business, unaware of the dramas unfolding behind the walls of their classrooms. The phone vibrated. A message from Arthur. "Honey, why don't we have dinner together? We need to talk." Nellie smiled. Of course they needed to talk, but not in the way Arthur planned. In her bag was a thumb drive with secrets from the past. The ethics committee papers were waiting in the office, and Sarah's words about revenge and justice came to mind. Nellie dialed her lawyer's number. "Mr. Harrison? Remember we talked about the trust? It's time to start the procedure. One more thing. I need you to check some documents. We're talking about events from 15 years ago." The Old Harbor restaurant was located in Olympia's historic district. The antique furniture and dim lighting created an atmosphere of seclusion, the perfect place for a difficult conversation. Nellie sat at a table in the far corner watching Arthur study the menu. "I recommend the duck fillet. It's cooked perfectly here." Arthur smiled, but the smile didn't touch his eyes. "Remember when we celebrated the signing of our first big contract here?" Nellie sipped her wine. "It was right after Walter's company went bankrupt." Arthur's hand holding the glass shook faintly. "It's been so many years. Why bring up old times? It just came to mind. You were so sure of success back then, even though everyone said we were taking a risk." A waiter came to the table. Arthur ordered the duck. Nellie limited herself to a salad. Classical music played softly in the room. Chopin, his favorite nocturne. "Nellie, I wanted to talk about the Ethics Commission." Arthur set the menu aside. "Don't you think you should recuse yourself? I am your husband after all." "Which is why I have to be especially objective." She looked him in the eye. "You do realize this is the reputation of the university we're talking about, right?" A door opened at the other end of the hall. Amelia Walter entered, accompanied by an older man. Nellie recognized him as Harold Stevens, the city's chief tax collector. "What a coincidence." Arthur turned pale. "Shall we change restaurants?" "Why? Dinner's just started." Amelia, walking past their table, nodded elegantly. A mysterious smile played on her lips. She and the inspector took a table by the window. "Tell me about the new project on Lakeside Avenue." Nellie blotted her lips with a napkin. "They say it's a very promising place." "Just a regular development. Nothing special." Arthur looked away. "Really? And I heard the land there belonged to Walter's company. Funny coincidence." The waiter brought the order. Arthur mechanically cut the duck fillet, unable to taste it. At a nearby table, Amelia was discussing something animatedly with the inspector, occasionally showing documents in a leather folder. "Why the innuendo, Nellie? Speak plainly." "I met with Sarah Walter. Interesting girl, told me a lot about her father." The fork clinked against the plate. Arthur blotted his forehead with his napkin. "Look, what happened to James is a tragedy, but I had nothing to do with it." "Really? Then why did all the documents about the Lakeside Avenue land deal disappear from the city archives?" The hall grew stuffy. Arthur loosened his tie. "Are you accusing me of something?" "No, dear. I'm just asking questions." Nellie smiled. "By the way, do you know why the IRS is suddenly interested in our old projects?" Lightning flashed outside the window. A thunderstorm was beginning. The third one this week. Amelia and the inspector were about to leave. As they passed, she dropped a business card on Arthur's desk. "Call me when you're ready to discuss the details of the deal." Her voice sounded deceptively soft. There was silence after they left. Arthur was twirling a business card in his hands with a handwritten phone number on the back. "Do you know what I found in the university archives?" Nellie pulled an old newspaper clipping from her purse. An article about the suicide of a young journalist. He was working on an investigation into fraud in the construction business. The last person he met was James Walter. "Nellie, stop it. You don't realize what you're getting yourself into." "On the contrary, I understand perfectly well. The question is, do you?" The maitre d' came to the table. "Mr. Montgomery, there's a phone call for you. They say it's urgent." Arthur apologized and walked out. Nellie gave him a look, pulled out her phone and typed a message. "He's got a bite. Go ahead." In the lobby of the restaurant, Arthur listened to Robert's excited voice. "They're sealing off the office. The IRS, the police are all here." "Stay calm. Are the documents safe?" "What calm? They found the secret accounting. Someone leaked the information to them." Arthur leaned against the wall. A thought pulsed in his head. She knew. All this time, she knew. Returning to the table, he found Nellie at the dessert table. She was serenely tasting chocolate mousse. "Is something wrong, darling? You've gone pale. We need to go to the office right away." "I'm sorry, I can't. I have a meeting with my lawyer." She blotted her lips with a napkin. "By the way, don't worry about the bill. I had it deducted from our joint account, the same one you tried to close this morning." Arthur froze. "You did what?" "Just protected our joint assets. You see, when a wife learns of her husband's infidelity, she has the right to take precautions." "You can't." "I can, and I already have." She stood up. "You know what the funny thing is? You got so caught up in your games with Amelia that you missed the main point. I was never just a quiet, submissive wife. I was your partner, and now I've become your adversary." Chopin played again in the hall. Nellie headed for the exit, leaving Arthur alone with a cooling dinner and a crumbling world. A car was waiting for her outside. Edward Thornton was behind the wheel. "Did everything go according to plan?" "Even better. He still doesn't realize that the real threat isn't Amelia. It's me." They pulled away from the restaurant. In the rearview mirror, Nellie saw Arthur run out onto the porch, trying unsuccessfully to hail a cab. "You know what my father said to me before he died?" She looked out at the city whizzing by outside the window. "Never trust someone who's willing to betray once. He'll betray again." Her cell phone vibrated in her pocket. A message from Sarah Walter. "Documents have been turned over to the DA. There's no turning back." Nellie's office at the university had become the center of an undercover investigation. A map of connections appeared on the walls, with red threads connecting names, dates, and events. Edward Thornton, seated in a visitor's chair, was reviewing the Montgomery Company's financial records for the past 15 years. "Look at this." He held out a document to Nellie. "Every time before a big deal, dummy contractors would show up. The money would pass through them and disappear offshore. A classic laundering scheme." Nellie made a note in her notebook. "But that's not what's most interesting. Notice the dates." She went to the map and drew a new thread. Each such operation coincided with the bankruptcy of a competitor. First, James Walter, then Marcus Reynolds, followed by Peter Hargrove. And the same MO everywhere? Exactly. First, the victim company would get a big contract. Then there'd be problems with contractors, missed deadlines. The tax authorities got involved and found violations. And when the company was on the verge of collapse, Arthur would show up with an offer to save the day. Edward finished. There was a knock on the door. Sarah Walter entered with a new folder of papers. "I found my father's notes. He kept a diary of the investigation." Nellie picked up a shabby, leather-covered notebook. James Walter's scrawled handwriting filled the pages, folding into the story of the last months of his life. "March 23rd, Nellie began to read. "Met with Inspector Stevens. He confirmed my suspicions. The tax audit was a contract audit. Someone very powerful wants my ruin." She flipped the page. April 2nd. "Journalist Michael Donovan has promised to help with the investigation. He has documents on similar schemes in other cities." "Donovan?" Edward frowned. "The same one who allegedly committed suicide?" "Yes. The day before the story was published." Sarah sat down on the edge of the table. "Father was convinced it was murder." Nellie walked over to the window. In the university parking lot, she spotted a familiar car, a black sedan from her husband's company's security team. "We're being followed." She pulled back the curtains. "Then we're on the right track." "Maybe we should go to the police," Sarah suggested. "Not yet. We need hard evidence." Nellie turned back to the map. "Look, after each bankruptcy, The victim's assets went to shell companies. Then 6 months later, Arthur's corporation buys them out. But how do you prove the connection? Through bank transactions. Nellie pulled out a thumb drive. Here's the data on the movement of funds. Your father had time to copy them before he disappeared. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Edward quickly put the documents away in the safe. The secretary of the ethics committee appeared in the doorway. Professor Montgomery, the commissioners are assembled. Everyone is just waiting for you. Nellie nodded to her colleagues and headed for the conference room. There she was in for a surprise. Sitting among the commissioners was Robert Wayne, Arthur's partner. I hope you don't mind my presence. His smile was professionally impeccable. As a representative of the company, it is my duty to protect its interests. Of course, Mr. Wayne. The more witnesses, the better. The meeting began. Nellie methodically presented evidence of irregularities in the company's recent projects. Nothing major. Minor inconsistencies in documents, odd coincidences in dates. These are just routine bureaucratic errors, Robert objected. It happens in the construction business. Maybe, Nellie agreed, but they add up to an interesting picture. She displayed a graph on the screen. The dates of the violations coincided with the peaks of offshore activity. Robert squirmed in his chair. After the meeting, he caught up with her in the hallway. Nellie, stop. You don't realize what you're getting into. I do, Robert. Better than you think. Arthur loves you. He's always had your best interests at heart. Has he? She paused. Then why did he try to secretly sell the house that is in my name? Robert turned pale. How do you... I have my sources, and you know what? I'm just getting started. Returning to the study, Nellie found Amelia Walter there. She was examining a map on the wall. Impressive work. Amelia ran her finger along the red thread. But you've missed the main point. Which is what? Robert Wayne's role. He's not just Arthur's partner. He's the mastermind behind the whole scheme. Nellie sat down at the table. Why should I believe you? Because I've spent 15 years gathering evidence, and I'm willing to share it. In exchange for what? A guarantee that Arthur will get what he deserves. Amelia pulled out an envelope. Here are the records of the first deal, the one that started it all. Nellie took the envelope. Why now? Because the time has come. Robert is preparing a new victim, Randall's construction company, and if we don't stop them now... We? Nellie raised an eyebrow. Yes, we are. We have different motives, but the goal is the same. After Amelia left, Nellie stared at the envelope for a long moment. There could be a trap inside, or a clue. The phone rang, Arthur's number. She dropped the call and dialed another number. Mr. Harrison, remember you were talking about Robert Wayne's secret accounts? It's time to check them out. As she left the university that evening, Nellie noticed that the surveillance had disappeared. That was more alarming than the presence of the spies. A note from Martha was waiting for her at home. Mr. Montgomery came by, took some papers from his office. Nellie went up to her husband's office. The safe was open and empty. On the desk was a picture of their wedding, young, happy, confident about the future. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to Edward. He's picked up the paperwork, going to Plan B. Plan B was risky. But now she had no choice. The game was entering its decisive phase, and the cost of making a mistake was becoming too high. The office of Randall's construction company was located in a modern business center on the outskirts of Olympia. Nellie parked the car in the underground parking lot and went up to the 20th floor. James Randall, a burly man in his 60s, met her in a spacious office with a panoramic view of the city. Professor Montgomery, to what do I owe the pleasure? He pointed to the visitor's chair. Mr. Randall, I've come to warn you. Your company is the next target. Randall frowned. What are you talking about? Nellie pulled out a file folder. A familiar pattern. First a big contract, then problems with contractors, then a tax audit. And at the end, a life-saving offer from my husband's company. How do you know about the contract? We just got the offer yesterday. Because I've seen this script before. James Walter, Marcus Reynolds, Peter Hargrove, they've all been through it. Robert Wayne entered the office without knocking. Seeing Nellie, he froze on the threshold. What a surprise, his smile seemed glued on. Didn't expect to meet you here. Likewise, Robert. Wasn't the meeting scheduled for tomorrow? Randall shifted his gaze from one visitor to the other. Do you two know each other? More than. Nellie opened the folder. Mr. Randall, take a look at these documents. A list of the companies ruined by Robert and my husband's scheme. Wayne stepped forward. That's slander. You have no proof. Really? What about Amelia Walter's testimony? At the mention of that name, Robert turned pale. Footsteps were heard in the hallway as Amelia herself entered the office. Hello, Uncle Robert, she said the words with a cold chuckle. Uncle? Randall rose from the table. Yes, Mr. Randall. Robert Wayne is my own uncle. He was the one who orchestrated the bankruptcy of my father's company. Nellie watched the scene unfold. The plan worked perfectly. All the figures took their places. Amelia, don't do anything stupid, Robert tried to maintain control of the situation. Stupidity? For 15 years I've waited for this moment. You betrayed your brother, my father, exploited his trust, stole everything he built. I saved what could have been saved. James was in debt. He was leading the company to ruin. Liar. Amelia threw a new folder on the table. Here are the transaction documents. You created those debts on purpose by manipulating the company's accounts. Randall studied the papers, his face growing grimmer. Same shell companies, same schemes to withdraw funds. And the same signature on the documents, Nellie added. Robert was the perfect organizer. Arthur provided cover and connections, and the executors changed. There were new people in the office, agents of the financial police. Robert yanked at the door, but it was too late. Robert Wayne, you are under arrest on suspicion of financial fraud and organizing a criminal scheme. While the agents read the rights, Nellie got a text from Edward. Arthur just sold his stock. Looks like he's getting ready to make a run for it. She turned to Amelia. Your part of the deal is done. Now it's my turn. Are you really willing to go up against your husband? I'm going up against a criminal. The fact that he's my husband only makes the betrayal more serious. Leaving Randall's office, Nellie headed for the bank. She had to get the accounts locked before Arthur got his hands on the money. At the bank, she got a surprise. Arthur had beaten her to it. The manager said, I'm sorry, Mrs. Montgomery. Your husband provided a power of attorney with your signature on it. It's a forgery. Nellie pulled out her cell phone. Call the police. I'm filing a fraud report. When she returned home, she found the locks had been changed. A note on the door read, I'm sorry, darling. You forced yourself on me. Nellie grinned and dialed the lawyer's number. Mr. Harrison, it's time to use our trump card. Activate the asset protection protocol. At that instant, all of Montgomery's company accounts were frozen. The security system Nellie had secretly installed a month ago worked flawlessly. The phone rang. Arthur's number. What have you done? His voice shook with rage. What I should have done a long time ago, protected what we built together. You've ruined everything. No, Arthur, it was you who destroyed it. All I did was restore justice. There was silence, then a bitter laugh. You know, Amelia warned me, said you weren't as easy as you looked. Amelia said a lot of things, like how you planned to get rid of me after you appropriated my share of the company. She lied. Really? Then why did you forge my signature on the stock sale documents? The silence was more eloquent than any words. Goodbye, Arthur. Your lawyer will contact my attorney. She hung up and typed a message to Sarah Walter. The case is done. Justice has been served. The reply came instantly. Dad would be proud of you. Thank you. Nellie got into her car and drove to the hotel. Tomorrow was going to be a busy day, a press conference, a meeting with the prosecutor, endless questioning and testimony. But the main thing was done. The empire of lies had collapsed, burying those who had built it under the rubble. In the rearview mirror, she caught sight of Amelia's silhouette standing at the entrance to the bank. Their gazes met, two women bound by revenge and betrayal, each with her own truth and her own pain. Nellie nodded, a final farewell to the past. There was a new life ahead without lies and masks. And the city outside the window was already turning sunset colors, as if closing another chapter in this story of betrayal and retribution. The room at the Grand Olympia had become Nellie's temporary refuge. The papers spread out on the wide table were adding up to a picture of years of criminal activity. Edward Thornton, ensconced in a chair by the window, was reviewing the morning news on a tablet. Montgomery Company stock has plummeted 70%. He showed a graph of the falling stock price. Investors are panicking. As planned, Nellie noted something in her notebook. What about Robert? Silent for now. His lawyers are demanding a plea bargain. There was a knock at the door. A room service had delivered coffee. The aroma of freshly brewed brew filled the room, reminding her of home mornings that now seemed a distant past. Miss Walter called. Edward sipped his coffee. Says she has information about Arthur's secret account in Switzerland. I don't trust her. Nellie went to the window. She shows up too soon with her findings. Outside, the rain was drizzling. Passers-by hurried about their business, unaware of the drama unfolding in the city's business circles. A familiar black security sedan was parked on the opposite side of the street. We're still being followed, she pulled back the curtain, so Arthur hasn't given up yet. The phone vibrated, a message from Mr. Harrison. New transactions detected. Urgently need your signature. Let's go to the lawyer's office, Nellie began, gathering paperwork. Looks like our fugitive has decided to go undercover. Sarah Walter was waiting for them in the hotel lobby. Her face expressed alarm. There's news. Robert has agreed to talk. On one condition? Nellie paused. Yes, he wants to meet with you. In private. Mr. Harrison's office was in the old courthouse. Solid wood paneling and stained glass windows created an atmosphere of immutability of the law. The attorney met them in the conference room. Take a look at this. He spread out some documents on the table. A series of transactions through shell companies, all leading to the same beneficiary. Amelia Walter. Nellie studied the flowchart of the funds. So I was right. She worked for both sides. Sarah went pale. Used both my father and you. Not exactly. Nellie pulled out a flash drive. Remember the documents she handed over? I did my own investigation. Half of them are forgeries. Silence hung in the room. Edward was the first to break the silence. Why would she do that? To misdirect us. While we were chasing ghosts of the past, she was building her own scheme. Nellie opened the laptop. Look, over the last month, she's been buying up shares in the company through front men, waited for the price to drop, and now controls almost 30%. And given Arthur's stake, Harrison began. They have a controlling interest, Nellie finished. The perfect plan. Use revenge as a cover for a hostile takeover. The phone rang. Arthur's number. Nellie put it on speakerphone. Impressed. His voice sounded unusually calm. You proved to be a worthy adversary. Can't say the same for you. Contacting Amelia? Seriously? She offered a lucrative deal. And you believed it, after everything you learned about her past. Arthur's laugh sounded bitter. Did I have a choice? You backed me into a corner. There are always choices, like telling the truth, for example. The truth? He was silent for a moment. Okay, come to our old house. We'll talk without witnesses. What makes you think I'll come? Because I have something that belongs to you, like documents about your involvement in deals from 15 years ago. Nellie glanced over at Edward. You're bluffing. Check your secret safe in the study. Remember, the one behind the Renoir painting? The connection broke. Nellie slowly put the phone down. He's lying, Sarah said confidently. It's a trap. Maybe, Nellie started to gather herself, but we'll check it out. You're not going to go alone, are you? Edward stood up. No, you're coming with me, and Mr. Harrison will activate our backup plan. The lawyer nodded and pulled a file folder from the safe. Everything is ready, just waiting for your signal. On the way to the mansion, Nellie looked through old photos on her phone. Her and Arthur's wedding, their first housewarming party, business meetings and family celebrations, a life built on lies. You know, she turned to Edward, the scariest part isn't the betrayal. It's scary to realize that the person you've lived with for 23 years has turned out to be a stranger. It's not your fault. It is, for turning a blind eye, for letting it happen. The mansion greeted them with dark windows. Arthur's car and an unfamiliar silver sedan stood in the driveway. He's not alone. Edward pulled out his cell phone. Should we call the police? Not yet. Let's hear what he has to say first. The front door was unlocked. A dim light burned in the hallway. On the table lay a fresh newspaper with the headline, Scandal in Montgomery's Construction Empire. Collapse or redistribution of property. Come in, dear. Arthur's voice came from the study. We have guests. In his favorite chair sat Amelia Walter. A tall man in an expensive suit stood next to her. I'd like you to meet, Arthur pointed at the stranger. Mr. Chen, a representative of Chinese investors. They're very interested in buying our company. Nellie looked around at the gathered crowd. An interesting company. And what kind of deal are you going to offer me? A fair one, Amelia pitched forward. You get your cut and leave. We forget the past. And in return, you drop all charges. You drop the investigation. Nellie walked over to the Renoir painting. It did indeed reveal a safe behind it. You know what's funny? She ran her hand over the canvas. This painting is a fake, just like everything in this house. Arthur tensed. What are you talking about? About the fact that the real documents have been in a safe place for a long time, and your deal with the Chinese investors? I'm afraid it's fallen through. She pulled out her phone and turned on the news feed. The headline read, Arrest of the Century, an international money laundering scheme in the construction business uncovered. What have you done? Arthur tore toward her. What I should have done a long time ago. Deliver justice. The office was filled with a tense silence. Dusk was thickening outside the windows, and the lights of the city were slowly turning on. Arthur sank slowly into his chair, keeping his eyes on the screen of Nellie's phone, where new news headlines continued to appear. Mr. Chen, Nellie turned to the Chinese investor. Or should I call you Agent Chen? Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Unit if I'm not mistaken. The man smiled and pulled out his ID. Impressive work, Mrs. Montgomery. The operation took almost a year. Amelia jumped up, but her path to the door was blocked by Edward. Heavy footsteps were heard in the hallway. The FBI agents entered the office. You planned this whole thing, Arthur looked at his wife with a mixture of admiration and hatred. From the beginning. Not exactly, Nellie crouched on the edge of the desk. Initially, I just wanted to understand why my husband was leading a double life, and then I started digging deeper. She opened her laptop. You know what I found in the IRS archives? An interesting pattern. Every time your company was awarded a major contract, significant sums of money passed through offshore accounts, and the recipients were always the same people. It's business, Arthur snapped back. You don't understand anything. Really? Then explain to me why a company owned by a high-ranking Chinese official is listed among the recipients, the same one who approved the construction contracts in the Special Economic Zone. Mr. Chen made a note in his notebook. We've been following this scheme for a long time, but we needed an insider. And that's where I came in, Amelia grinned bitterly. The perfect bait, the daughter of a broke businessman out for revenge. Not exactly, Nellie shook her head. You weren't bait, you were an accomplice. We found your accounts in the Cayman Islands. Another person appeared in the office, Sarah Walter. She held up a folder of documents. I'm sorry, sister, but the truth has to come out. Sarah? Amelia turned pale. You worked against me? I worked for justice, for my father's memory, and you became like them. Arthur watched the unfolding scene with growing concern. Where is Robert? Why isn't he here? Oh, Robert is testifying at the prosecutor's office right now. Nellie turned on a recording on her laptop. Listen, it's interesting. Robert's voice sounded tired. It all started 15 years ago. Arthur came up with a scheme. We get insider information on big projects, cause problems for our competitors, and then buy up their assets for next to nothing. And you decided to start with your own brother? The investigator's voice. James knew too much. He started guessing about the scheme with the Chinese investors. Arthur jumped up. Turn that off! He's lying! No, dear. For the first time in years he's telling the truth. Nellie shifted her gaze to Amelia. So is your mistress. She's been cooperating with the investigation for a long time. Amelia laughed. You think you're so smart? Yes, I worked for the feds, but I had my own plan. She pulled out her phone. One message and all the documents about Nellie's involvement in 15-year-old deals will be online. We'll see whose reputation will suffer more. I wouldn't advise it, came a voice from the doorway. Mr. Harrison entered the office. These documents are forgeries. We can prove it. You're bluffing. Amelia went pale. Shall we check? The lawyer pulled out a folder. Forensics has already confirmed the signatures are fake. And you know what's interesting? They match the handwriting samples in your old fraud case. Nellie walked over to the safe behind the painting. You know what's really in here? It's empty. All the documents have long been in the hands of the investigation, and this spectacle was necessary to get you all in one place. The flashing lights of police cars flashed outside the window. Agent Chen pulled out handcuffs. Arthur Montgomery, Amelia Walter, you're under arrest on charges of financial fraud, money laundering, and organizing a criminal enterprise. While the agents read the detainees their rights, Nellie gathered paperwork. 23 years of marriage fit into a few binders of evidence of crimes. Why? Arthur stopped at the door. Why didn't you come to me right away when you found out? Would you have confessed, told the truth about James Walter, about the Chinese investors, about all the ruined competitors? I loved you. No, Arthur. You loved only power and money. And I was just a convenient cover. As the police cars drove the detainees away, Nellie, Edward, and Sarah remained in the study. What now? Sarah looked at the family photos on the walls. Now? Nellie walked over to the window. Now we rebuild what they destroyed. We'll start over. Edward put a hand on her shoulder. You could have just gotten a divorce. Why the whole plan? Because this isn't about divorce. It's about justice, about stopping them before they ruin anyone else's lives. The phone rang on the desk. The prosecutor wanted to discuss the details of the upcoming trial. Nellie glanced at the clock. A new day was beginning. The day when the empire of lies finally collapsed, burying its creators under the rubble. The city outside her window continued to live its life, indifferent to the dramas playing out in one of its luxurious mansions. Only the rising sun painted the sky the color of hope, promising a new beginning for those who found the strength to fight for the truth. The Thurston County courtroom was filling up with people. Journalists took front-row seats. Photographers set up their cameras. The trial of the Montgomery construction empire promised to be the highest-profile trial in decades. Nellie sat in the witness room, reviewing her testimony. Mr. Harrison sat next to her, making final notes on the documents. Outside the window, Olympia's usual fall rain drizzled. The prosecutor wants to start with the James Walter episode. The attorney handed her a new folder. This will increase the emotional impact on the jury. Makes sense. This is where it all started. She glanced at her watch. Is Sarah ready to testify? Yes, but Amelia is demanding a confrontation with her sister. Her lawyers are pushing family conflict as the primary motive for the charges. Footsteps were heard in the hallway. Edward Thornton entered, drenched from the rain. The IRS just called. They found another account in Singapore. Looks like Robert's been preparing an alternate airfield. Nellie set the papers aside. Is he still pushing for a plea deal? Yes, but the prosecutor is hesitant. There are too many big names involved in this case. Voices sounded outside the door as the first group of defendants were brought in. Nellie recognized Arthur's voice, discussing something softly with his lawyer. The bailiff looked into the room. Mrs. Montgomery, we start in 15 minutes. She nodded and pulled an old photograph out of her purse, her and Arthur's wedding. Young, happy faces, genuine smiles. Who would have thought that 23 years later it would end up in a courtroom? You know, Edward sat down next to them. I keep thinking about Amelia's words, about how revenge destroys more than just the people it's aimed at. It's not revenge, Ed. It's justice. What's the difference? Nellie thought for a moment. In purpose. Revenge is meant to inflict pain. Justice is to restore balance. The courtroom began to move. The jurors took their seats. The judge stepped up to the pulpit. The trial was beginning. Agent Chen was the first to testify. He methodically laid out the scheme of international money laundering, showed diagrams of the flow of funds, named names of high-ranking officials. Arthur sat motionless, staring at one point. Nearby, Amelia was nervously poring over her rosary. In the pew behind them sat a pale Robert, avoiding meeting the eyes of the other defendants. The prosecution witness is Sarah Walter, the clerk announced. A young woman stepped up to the witness stand. Her voice trembled, but her gaze remained steadfast. 15 years ago, my father discovered an embezzlement scheme in the construction industry. He collected evidence, met with journalists. Objection! Arthur's counsel jumped in. Hearsay testimony is inadmissible. Overruled. The judge tapped his gavel. Proceed, Miss Walter. Sarah pulled out a shabby journal. These are my father's notes. It details the whole scheme. How Robert Wayne betrayed his own brother, how Arthur Montgomery organized the raid of the company, how the debt documents were fabricated. There was silence in the hall. Amelia dug her nails into the armrests of her chair. And then what happened? The prosecutor asked. Father made an appointment with a journalist, Michael Donovan. That same evening, Donovan was killed in a car accident and the father disappeared. Are you saying these events are connected? Objection. The defense attorney jumped in again. Sustained, the judge frowned. The jury must exclude that last contention from consideration. But the point was made. A whisper ran through the rows of jurors. They saw the defendants' reactions, noticed their nervousness. Nellie was called as the next witness. She stepped up to the witness stand, feeling her husband's intense gaze on her. Mrs. Montgomery, can you tell us how you discovered the criminal scheme? She began with a telephone conversation overheard that evening at the mansion. She described how she began gathering information, how a picture of years of machinations gradually took shape. Why didn't you go to the police right away? Because the system was too complicated. We had to gather irrefutable evidence. Besides, there were high-ranking officials among those involved in the scheme. When did you decide to cooperate with the FBI? After I met with Sarah Walter, when I realized the scale of the crimes and the number of victims. Arthur whispered something to his attorney. He stood up. Tell me, Mrs. Montgomery, did you have any personal motives? Perhaps you were driven by jealousy? Objection! The prosecutor jumped up. Overruled. The witness may answer. Nellie looked straight into Arthur's eyes. Yes, I had personal motives. When someone you trust betrays you, it hurts. But that's not the point. It's about choosing between truth and lies, between law and crime. A new witness was brought into the room, the company's former chief accountant. With trembling hands, he pored over documents talking about double bookkeeping, false contracts, fictitious suppliers. Amelia tapped her heel nervously on the floor. Her lawyer looked increasingly worried. Robert Wayne was scribbling something hastily on a piece of paper. By mid-afternoon, the prosecutor had presented key evidence: bank statements, contracts, phone records. The story of financial fraud unfolded before the jury in great detail. During a break, Nellie ran into Arthur in the hallway. He looked aged, drained. Why? His voice sounded muffled. We could have worked things out differently. Really? And how was that? Would you have confessed everything? Returned the money to the victims? Told them about Donovan's murder? He shuddered. I had nothing to do with that. Really? Who gave the order to security? Who orchestrated that supposedly random accident? You have no proof. Wrong. Your security chief turned out to be more talkative, especially after we found his secret accounts. Arthur turned pale. At that moment, he was led away by the bailiffs. The break was ending. The second half of the session began with a sensation. Robert Wayne decided to testify against his accomplices. His lawyer read out a statement of full confession of guilt and cooperation with the investigation. Amelia jumped up. Traitor, you promised you'd keep quiet. The judge called for order, but it was too late. The jury heard this spontaneous outcry. Robert's testimony was devastating. He described in detail the role of each participant in the scheme, provided documents, and named the names of the corrupt officials. It was Arthur's idea, his voice shook, to use information from Chinese partners for raids. Amelia was in charge of asset legalization. I handled the financial side. What happened to James Walter? He found out too much. Arthur said he'd be dealt with. I never saw him again. An uproar went up in the hall. Lawyers jumped up with objections. Reporters scribbled in their notebooks. The judge adjourned until the next day. Leaving the courthouse, Nellie spotted Sarah at the exit. The girl was crying, clutching her father's diary to her chest. We got what we wanted. Nellie put her arm around her shoulders. Now everyone will know the truth. You know what the worst part is? Sarah wiped away her tears. Amelia really believed she was avenging her father and actually became just like his killers. Outside, the rain continued to drizzle. The city lived its life, but now there was a little more justice in it, albeit belated, albeit long-suffering, but justice. That evening in her hotel room, Nellie watched the news. Her phone was ringing off the hook. Journalists, lawyers, investigators. Everyone wanted commentary, details, exclusive interviews. Edward brought coffee and the latest papers. What are you going to do next? Rebuilding the company, compensate the victims, build an honest business. And a personal life? She smiled. You know, for 23 years I've lived someone else's life. It's time to start my own. Outside the window, the city was turning on its evening lights. Somewhere in a holding cell, Arthur Montgomery was preparing for his long years of imprisonment. In a neighboring cell, Amelia Walter was writing a letter to her sister, a letter she would never read. And Nellie looked out over the rainy city and thought that sometimes the worst revenge is justice. When the masks are ripped off, the truth is revealed, and everyone gets what they deserve. A year after the high-profile trial, the Montgomery Corporation office was transformed. Gone were the heavy curtains and dark furniture that symbolized power and inaccessibility. Now the spacious rooms were flooded with natural light, and glass partitions created an atmosphere of openness and transparency. Nellie was reviewing a quarterly report when Sarah Walter, now CFO, entered the office. Profits are up 20%. She placed fresh charts on the desk. Investors are pleased with the company's new policies. What about the compensation program? Payouts are on schedule. The Reynolds family received the first installment, rebuilding their business. Nellie went to the window. Down below, construction was boiling. A new apartment complex for young families was being built. The social housing project James Walter had once dreamed of. How's the investigation going? Sarah perched on the edge of the table. The investigators have uncovered new episodes. It seems the scheme wasn't just working in our state. A notification flashed on the computer screen. A letter from an attorney. Arthur had signed the final divorce papers. Now, officially, their 23-year marriage was no more. You know what's funny? Nellie closed the mail. He never admitted his guilt, even after Robert told me all about the events of 15 years ago. There was a knock at the door. A courier had delivered fresh newspapers. On the front page was a picture of the courthouse and the headline, "Construction Mafia Case Sentenced. Arthur Montgomery gets 15 years in prison." Sarah ran her eyes over the article. Amelia was given 10 years. Given the plea deal, she may get out sooner. And Robert? 7 years probation. His testimony was crucial. Nellie put the paper aside and pulled an old photograph out of the safe, a group shot of Walter's board of directors. Young Arthur, confident James, young Amelia in the background. Sometimes I think, she ran her finger over the photograph, if only someone had stopped them then, 15 years ago, how many lives could have been saved? You couldn't have known. I could have. I just didn't want to see. All the signs were there on the surface, the sudden wealth, the strange deals, the disappearance of competitors. Edward Thornton, now head of corporate ethics, came into the office. "We have visitors from the DA's office. They want to discuss the new case files." Nellie nodded. "Show them to the conference room. Sarah, they'll need you too." The meeting went on for several hours. The investigators uncovered more and more details of the criminal scheme, names of high-ranking officials, bankers, judges. "This is just the tip of the iceberg," the young prosecutor laid out the schemes of connections on the table. "We found similar structures in 3 neighboring states." "And the same MO everywhere?" Nellie studied the documents. "Yes, it looks like your husband created the perfect system. It's just a shame he used his talent for destruction instead of creation." After the meeting, Nellie lingered in the office. The lights of the city bloomed in the evening, the sunset reflected in the windows of the neighboring skyscrapers. The phone rang the number for the county jail. Arthur asked for a meeting. "Why?" Her voice sounded tired. "I want to explain. You have to understand." "No, Arthur. The time for explanation is past. Now it's only time for payback." She hung up the phone and pulled an old notebook from her desk drawer. The first page read, "James Walter's Diary, Continued Investigation." 15 years ago, James had begun collecting evidence. Now Nellie was continuing his case, unraveling a tangle of crimes that stretched across years and fates. There was a knock at the door. Martha, their former housekeeper. After Arthur's arrest, she'd stayed on at the company. "Mrs. Montgomery, excuse me, Miss Nellie," she stammered. "There's a woman here. Says she knows something important about Mr. Walter's death." In the reception area sat an elderly lady who was James's former secretary. She was nervously rubbing an old envelope in her hands. "I've been silent all these years," her voice trembled. "Afraid to. But now that the truth has come out." She held out the envelope. "Mr. Walter left this before he disappeared. Asked me to give it to his daughters in case anything happened to him." Nellie summoned Sarah. Together they opened the yellowed envelope. Inside were documents and a flash drive. "It's all here," the secretary whispered. "Evidence, names, dates. He had time to copy the files before." She didn't finish, but everyone understood the understatement. James Walter knew they were coming for him, so he prepared. Late that night, the people closest to him, Edward, Sarah, Mr. Harrison, gathered in Nellie's office. They were studying the documents they had found. "I can see why Arthur was so afraid of publicity," Edward shook his head. "This isn't just financial fraud. There's contract killings, bribing judges, international crime. And what are we supposed to do with this information?" Sarah looked at the flash drive. "The same thing your father would do," Nellie turned on the computer. "Go public." Night fell, but work continued in the office. Documents were being organized. Law enforcement requests were being prepared. Press releases were being drafted. At dawn, Nellie went to the roof of the building. The city was waking up, coloring in the gentle tones of the rising sun. Somewhere out there, in a jail cell, Arthur was waiting for a new trial. In a neighboring cell, Amelia was writing her memoirs, hoping for early release. The phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. They found a body. In the woods by the lake. Forensics confirmed it's James Walter. 15 years of searching had come to an end. Now the family could give him a proper burial and the killers would be held accountable. The staff began to arrive at the office. A new day brought new tasks: rebuilding destroyed businesses, helping the victims, building an honest company. Nellie returned to the office. On the desk was a photograph of her and Arthur's wedding. She put the picture away in a drawer. The past should stay in the past. A file with a new project opened on the computer screen. A residential complex for young professionals. Affordable prices, convenient infrastructure, environmentally friendly materials. Everything James Walter had dreamed of. "Ready to start the meeting?" Sarah peeked in. Nellie nodded. Life went on, now with no lies, no masks, no betrayal, just honest work and a clear conscience. And the city outside the window was filled with the light of a new day, promising new opportunities to those who were not afraid to fight for the truth. After all, sometimes to restore justice, you just need to find the strength to start again. That was the main victory, not in revenge, not in punishing the guilty, but in the ability to build something new on the ruins of the old, something honest, right, worthy. And looking at the rising sun, Nellie knew they could do it. For the memory of those who died for the truth, for the future of those who believe in justice, for the sake of herself, a woman who had found the strength to destroy the empire of lies and start a new life.